Thank you. Trustee Sepe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Picking up on what I spoke about before, as I mentioned, I wanted to separate my personal opinions from the facts of what the village has done over the last several years. And the reason that the mayor asked me to do this tonight is because I speak to varying degrees for all members of the board, all of whom have expressed their opposition to the idea of legalizing recreational marijuana in New York State. The subject itself is one where reasonable people and smart people can disagree. Plenty of friends of mine are on both sides of this issue, but one thing that I have personally noticed is that people that seems to me that people that are for legalizing recreational marijuana tend to do it in the abstract. What do I mean by that? Supporters of legalization, from my perspective, seem to come at this from the perspective of the question being, should I be able to smoke marijuana for fun, for recreational purposes, if I want to? In other words, how will it affect me? And that's fair. But I respectfully suggest that rather than look at the idea in the abstract, that we take a somewhat different perspective, which should be, if marijuana is legalized for recreation in New York State, what will be the effect on my state, on my community, on my children who are of driving age, on my younger children, on my neighbors, and then on me? My perspective personally is a little bit unusual. As you all know, I've been the police liaison for this village for the past 6+ years, and I began my career in law enforcement as an assistant district attorney, during which time I prosecuted probably in excess of 1,000 drug offenses, major and minor, anything from crack and heroin to petty marijuana offenses, and you would expect somebody with that type of background to be against legalization. But my perspective is a little bit different, because part of my practice is the fact that I am a criminal defense attorney. And I have defended and represented dozens of mostly teenagers and millennials for various marijuana offenses. And despite the fact that I've stood up in court and advocated for their rights, I am here to tell you that broadly based, this proposal, this idea of recreational marijuana, of legalizing it for fun, is probably the worst and most destructive legislative proposal to come out of Albany in a generation. Why? Well, sometimes you can tell whether or not something is a good idea if you look at the arguments that are thrown about by the people that are in support of it. And broadly speaking, it comes down to two among the supporters. The first is money. Now, it's been pointed out that recently New York State has discovered approximately a $2 billion shortfall in its budget. And it's an open secret in Albany that at the highest levels of our state government, certain high-level politicians only came out in support of legalization of recreational pot when this budget shortfall was discovered. This has been worsened by the loss of prospective business coming to New York, not just the Amazon deal, but the fact that the state continually ranks in the bottom of the 50 states on all major economic categories. So simply put, we have chased away so many jobs and so much business that we are now considering legalizing a drug to attempt to make up the shortfall rather than focusing on what really caused the shortfall in the first instance. Second, the argument from proponents that you often hear is legalizing drugs will somehow benefit minority communities. Now, at the risk of being overly blunt, some proposals are stupid and certain things are just pernicious lies. And in 20-something years of being a public servant, a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and a village official, this is probably the worst of those lies I have ever seen. This country has watched since the late 1950s as various drugs to various degrees have literally devastated minority communities, far in excess of any effect on communities like Rockville Center, but literally damaged or broken up families or caused death to varying degrees across the country. And yet proponents will literally tell you that if we not only legalize a recreational drug, but also focus the sales of it in those same communities that have been so devastated, that we're supposed to ignore our eyes, ears, and memories and all our sensory capacities of the last 50 years and somehow believe that this will somehow help. And there are certain things that are slightly incredible, there are certain things that are just not believable, and that at a certain level, certain things approaching insult to your intelligence. And I suggest to you that that's what that argument is. And separate and apart from the abstract, I find that when people strip away the ideology and forget about what they think they're supposed to be for or against, depending on their political persuasion or their party, that it's useful to look at the reality. We are not the first. We have examples. We have had different types of laboratories across the country to see whether there are good effects, as talked about by the proponents, or whether there are negative effects. An example that we've used in the past is one of the first states to legalize recreational marijuana. That was Colorado. And to great fanfare about and pride of being one of the first to legalize, it was made legal for recreational purposes alone several years ago. And initially the reports were about a rise in state revenues and the new phenomenon of selling pot and marijuana and buds in stores and public interest pieces about how it sort of affected communities and people were adjusting to it. And then an interesting thing happened. The truth started to creep out, I think to the surprise of many. And hard data started coming out about how quality of life is affected by marijuana on streets and how children are affected. But most importantly, again, taking away ideology, pure, hard, cold numbers that cannot lie. Colorado has announced numerous times that the result of car crashes, that the results of car injuries and deaths have seriously increased specifically due to people driving under the influence of marijuana. Now, this is a state with a lower population density, with a smaller urban area, that has seen a serious increase in injuries and death as a result of legalizing marijuana. And the arguments about how it's not as bad as heroin or crack, that's true. But that misses completely the point of what is the good? What on earth will be the benefit of introducing even a mild level narcotic as something legal that we know once legal will increase use, and we know once increased in use will cause deaths? And that's not an exaggeration. And beyond that, it's been surprising to me because I was one of the people who thought this was a done deal, that there was no way this was going to be an open issue. And lo and behold, and to my pleasant surprise, a resistance has started to form. And now you see news specials from various states, Colorado, California, and other places, of people that have begun to say, well, that's nice, we generated some extra tax revenue. What's the economic problem from the loss of productivity from people that are habitual marijuana users? Did anyone stop to think about that? New York hasn't. And now other studies are coming out that recognize the reality that despite a lot of the proponents of this having come of age in the 60s, modern marijuana is not what people have come to experience or knew from their childhoods or their teen years. Modern marijuana typically is genetically or chemically altered to be as much as 20 or 30 times more potent than the purely organic marijuana of the 1960s. And then there's the argument, well, this isn't a chemical substance like ecstasy or something altered like heroin. It's an organic substance. So then do we apply that logic to hashish or raw opium? There's simply, when you really peel away the emotion and the fads and the if it feels good, pass it mentality, the cold, hard facts keep coming back to the same question. What earthly good will this do for our state? And to the extent it does any good, has anyone sat down and had the courage to confront their constituents and said, yeah, here's a benefit, and here's some hard numbers on the potential downfall? So, as a village, we've talked about what we can do, but I'm sitting here really as a New York State resident to talk about what we should do. Because we all are in contact with our state and county and town representatives. And again, coming from one of the people that thought this was more or less a lost cause, I am really glad to see the size of the resistance. The fact that all of a sudden politicians who were so eager to do this are hearing from people from across ideological lines, primarily people who have lived a bit or maybe who have kids or who drive, to say, wait a second, think about this. So I urge you, to the extent you are in contact with your state, county, and town representatives, to urge them to find a way to resist the fad, to make a decision based upon the facts, and to find the courage to say no. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Sepe.